We reached a very important milestone, Immanuel Kant. For those of you who actually attended the Philosophy Club meeting, we did already, and the Philosophy Club mentioned Kant. I talked about him in general. Just description of his philosophy within like 5 minutes. But to properly understand him, you need to go a little bit deeper, which is what we are going to do this week. We have 2 days dedicated to Kant, today and on Thursday. On Thursday, we're going to go into his metaphysics and his ethics. And today, epistemology. Remember what epistemology is. What is epistemology? What part of philosophy is epistemology? Theory of knowledge. How do we know things? What can we know? And that is the most important probably part of Kant's philosophy, even though not the only part. Okay, first let's repeat some of the things we have talked about before. Some of it we need for the exam. Almost all of it we need for the exam. Who was Copernicus and what did he do? Nicolaus Copernicus, do you remember? He was not a philosopher. He was an astronomer. So what did he do? Yeah.
Didn't he put the Earth at the center? He confirmed it.
Earth at the center. The sun at the center, yeah. that would not be much of a breakthrough if he put the Earth at the center. No, he put the sun at the center. Yeah. Prior to Copernicus, everybody thought that the Earth was at the center. And everything revolved around it. But remember what was the problem with that? If you place Earth at the center, with the sun, no problem. Sun does seem like it's revolved around the Earth. With the moon, same thing. But the planets, since they don't really revolve around the Earth, when you look in the sky, like most of us not astronomers, we don't pay attention, but astronomers did, and they did for centuries. And actually what you would see then is them making the weird loop, which people couldn't explain. It looked crazy, like why are they going like this? And they got these weird theories about it. But turns out that if you place the sun at the center, and then Earth is just circling on one orbit, and the planets on other orbits, then you understand and it makes perfect sense. And the Copernicus was the one who first suggested it. He said, hey, why don't we put the sun at the center? And then remember that he actually was basing it on Platonism. In Plato, for Plato, the circle is the perfect shape. So then all of these planets and the sun and everybody makes circles rather than loops. So to Copernicus, that was a big argument why this is true. It's only later on that they were able to actually prove it mathematically and finally even observe it. Nowadays you can fly into outer space and see it. But back then obviously they could not do any of these things. However, Copernicus was the first one to suggest it. It will be important to Kant because Kant calls his philosophy Copernican term. He actually compares himself to Copernicus. So we have to remember what did Copernicus do in order to understand what does Kant mean by this. Then let's remember a few things about Hume, who we talked about last time. And Hume had a huge impact on Kant. So first of all, according to Hume, what are the 3 elements we base our causal judgments on? What do we need 2 things to have in order for us to say one is causing the other? Yeah.
Is it resemblance on contiguity and cause and effect?
So resemblance, contiguity, and what's the third one?
Cause and effect.
Well, cause and effect is like we explain in cause and effect. So it can't be just cause and effect, right? So the 3 things are contiguity in space, temporal priority, and constant conjunction. So that's the 3. Contiguity in space and time. That's necessary because one thing should touch the other or have some sort of contact. Then temporal priority, one thing should be before the other in order for us to say it caused it. You can't have a cause which somehow follows after the effect. Right? That doesn't work this way. And then the third one is constant conjunction. So there should not be any exception. If one thing causes the other, you can have it sometimes causing the other, sometimes not causing the other. One happens, the other must happen after that. But what, according to Hume, is missing? Yeah.
Necessary connection?
Exactly. Necessary connection is what is missing. We make it up, he says. Because how do we know it's necessary? How can you presume when you drop in a bottle of water, it's necessarily going to fall? So, is there another question? So, what did he say? What are we basing it? This is like before the last. According to Hume, what is the basis of our belief in causal relation? What is the real reason we believe the causal relation according to Hume? Habit. Matter of habit. We always see it happening this way. So we're thinking it should continue happening this way forever. If every time we dropped the bottle, it fell, next time we're going to do it, we're again going to expect it to fall. But Hume, remember, said it doesn't have to fall. We are just assuming that, but we don't have the logical connection present there, necessary connection. So according to Hume, what kinds of propositions matter of fact concern? Remember, he distinguished two kinds of propositions. Matters of fact, and what's the other one? Relation of ideas. And what are the differences between relation of ideas and matters of fact? This is something we have actually talked about in 102. And this is what the distinction between deduction and induction based on. Did everybody sign the attendance? Everybody signed? So remember, deductive and inductive logic, deduction and induction, we have necessity here. Relation of ideas are necessarily connected. Matters of fact, are they necessarily connected? No. So this is where inductive logic, they based on probabilities, and in order to know them, we have to observe whether or not something takes place in experience. So that's what they are based on, experience. Again, this is going to be important for Kant. Experience, you have to actually see bottle fall every time in order to then conclude that bottles have to fall every time. You can't just get to it like 2 plus 2 equals 4, because it's not something which you, not something in the nature of a bottle or any nature of some other object to fall down. And remember, they didn't know about outer space and that there's no gravity there. Or for all they knew, everything always falls down. There's gravity. Okay. Then the substances. What's Hume's view on substances? We've been dealing with those substances from the beginning. Remember, Aristotle was the first one talking about them. But it's more interesting when we get closer to modern philosophy. Modern philosophy, Descartes. What did Descartes say about substances? He found two different types of substances. He said there are multiple substances of two types, which are what? Spiritual substances and material or physical, yeah. That's the two types of substances Descartes distinguished. But then Locke kind of agreed with him on that. Not Spinoza. Spinoza thought there's just one substance, which is God. But Locke agreed that there are different substances. He just said we don't really know exactly what they are. And then Berkeley said, no, actually, there's only one type of substances, which is spiritual or physical, for Berkeley.
Material?
No, for Berkeley that would be spiritual, because God gives us the ideas of everything. Remember, Berkeley didn't believe matter even existed. He's immaterialist. He says no matter. There is no matter, but there is spiritual substance. Okay, and then Hume said what? Hume comes after Berkeley, and he actually says, but basically according to Hume, we don't have good reason to believe in any kind of substances. So now while Berkeley disagreed just with material substance, Hume said, no, okay, material substance, but then why are you making up the spiritual substance? That's not something we can get to. And he even took a shot at Descartes, and he said Descartes thought that he found himself, right? I am thinking, therefore I exist. But Hume said, what about I? We don't know that either. What is I? Who is I? I don't know. Some thinking going on in my head. That I know. But I am thinking? He says that's too much of an assumption. So his view of the self was what? What is the self, according to Hume? Yeah.
Nothing but a bundle or collection of different perceptions.
Exactly. Nothing but a bundle of perceptions. Yeah. I can have the vision happening, the vision, if you like to put it as a line, the hearing, the senses. It does seem to have a point where all of this comes together in my head, but what is it? I don't know. All I know is that in a certain point in my mind, constantly this vision, hearing, and other senses seem to come together. So that's like a bundle, all of them. They are bundled together, and that's the self. Other than that, he says, I don't know what the hell it is. According to Hume, what is, well, we already covered that. So what did Hume argue ethical judgments are based on? Remember, morality. He said all morality is based on what?
Is it passions?
The feeling. Yeah, the passions, basically, you can say passions, but the feeling is a better way to put it. So our feelings is what tells us what is moral, what is not moral. Not reason. He says the reason is just a servant of our feelings. Now that's actually something we're going to talk about next time, because when we see what Kant has to say about morality, that will completely contradict Hume. Nonetheless, so just to remind you again, foundations of causal judgments for Hume were contiguity of two events in space, priority in time, constant conjunction. He says necessary connection, we don't know what it is. So that's the slide we had last time. And now Immanuel Kant. Who was Immanuel Kant? He was born in Königsberg, East Prussia on April 22nd, 1724. So he's younger than Hume, but they do overlap somewhat in terms of the years. So he read Hume, but later in life. Went to school at the University of Königsberg. By the way, Königsberg, if you try to find it on the map today, you're not going to find it. What exactly is Königsberg today? Königsberg and the entire East Prussia was actually, after World War II, given to Soviet Union, to Russia. So it's now Russian territory. Königsberg called Kaliningrad. This entire part, there's no more German people there. They all left, and it's all Russian. But at the time, it was part of Germany. It's on the Baltic Sea, just small kind of like chunk of land. And that's where he was born, 18th century, long time ago. Actually, what is it now? 301 years ago. He never left Königsberg. He is actually not a huge traveler. His entire life he spent in Königsberg, which doesn't mean that he didn't know anything about what's happening in the world. He read a lot. He, in fact, was a very, very educated man. Later, when he became a professor, he started lecturing on metaphysics, logic, ethics, aesthetics, philosophical theology, mathematics, physics, geography, and anthropology. By today's standards, it seems almost insane. Like today, no professor would lecture on so many different things, but at the time, of course, all those areas were not as developed as they are today. Today, just physics is insane. Like, to learn everything about physics, to be a professor of physics, you don't have time for much else. But back at the time, it was still possible, and he was very, very, what's the correct word? The person who knows a lot of things, right? He knew so much, it's amazing. His personal life was also kind of a little boring. He never married, even though he actually had some interests with women. It's not like he was completely asexual or something, but he never married, never had children. And finally, he retired in 1797 and died in 1804, which, you can do the math, he was 80 years old. At the time, that was quite a lot. Many people didn't live to 80 because there was practically no medical care. They didn't know how to treat anything. So you have to be very lucky to make it to 80, especially with all the diseases they had, like plague was every few years and so on. But he made it. Anyway, so what was his task? What was he trying to do? He describes it in Critique of Pure Reason at the very beginning. He says, well, there seems to be that there's two things happening, either dogmatism or skepticism in philosophy. Some philosophers are dogmatic. When they are dogmatic, as he himself, by the way, he considered himself younger in life as a dogmatic, they just uncritically accept certain things. So he thought that rationalist philosophers, for the most part, are dogmatics. That's what dogmatism is. That is one problem. But also, you can go too far into opposite direction and become too much of a skeptic. Like Hume, right? Hume seemed to be skeptical of everything. And that is also a problem. And he says either one of them, dogmatism being accepting things without properly critiquing them first. An example would be like Plato with his forms, right? Plato said, okay, there has to be forms of everything. Well, where are you getting this from? Do you have any foundation for this belief? And it seems like Plato didn't have a good foundation for it. Similarly, questioning literally everything and thinking we can't know anything, that's skepticism. That's when you say we can't even know there's a table in this room. How can we know that? That's going too far in an opposite direction. Kant was trying to kind of synthesize the whole thing. He was trying to find a middle way. And for this reason, he is not a rationalist and not empiricist. He is both. In fact, after Kant, we do not use this distinction anymore. Remember, the previous philosophers were saying this one is empiricist, this one is rationalist. Remember what the difference is. Empiricist believes we get everything from experience, we're born as a clean slate. Rationalist says, no, we have the entire thing already there, we're just kind of slowly remembering it or something. So Kant rejects both. However, he knew physics, mathematics, so he actually thought that indeed Newton makes perfect sense, and we can't just dismiss science. Science is important for us. Science has to be explained. We have to explain what it means for us, all these scientific discoveries, but not dismissed. So he agreed with rationalists that knowledge must be indeed universal, necessary, and certain. But he also agreed with empiricists that it begins with experience. So how can you combine the entire thing? Well, the three goals of the first critique, his most famous work, Critique of Pure Reason, first of all, to develop new understanding of knowledge which combines empiricism and rationalism. Second, to reconcile science with religion, morality, and human freedom. So remember, that was the big problem for all of them. Science seemed to be leading us away from, well, first of all, religion, because it leaves less and less room for God. But because of that, it seems to lead us away from morality. If there's no God, maybe we can do anything we want, just as long as nobody can see us, right? So more and more people were thinking in this way. And finally, human freedom, because again, remember, that's the problem for many philosophers. How do you explain human freedom? If everything follows the rules of physics, it seems like we also all follow the rules of physics. So in that case, the murderer kills somebody not because they chose to do it, but because of the laws of physics in their brain. And what's the problem with that? We can't blame the murderer. We can't blame anybody, right? The person who committed the most atrocious crimes can tell us, well, it's physics. Nothing I could do. It's all the laws of nature in my head. And that seems wrong. It does seem to us like we do kind of have freedom. But how does it all reconcile? So he had some really, really good answers. Whether they're perfect, they are not perfect. Anything can be criticized. But he tried to solve this crisis of metaphysics, basically just provide a way for us to still believe in God, still believe in freedom of the will, in morality, and yet believe in science at the same time, and believe that science makes perfect sense. Okay, so again, dogmatism, which he himself says he was a victim to, is the presumption of getting on solely and purely with pure cognition from philosophical concepts according to principles which reason has been using for a long time without first inquiring in what way and by what right it was obtained. Many philosophers did it. So dogmatic procedure of pure reason without an antecedent critique of its capacity. First you have to figure out what is your brain capable of knowing, right? What is your reason capable of achieving? And only then, he says, can you start thinking about things like God, freedom of the will, and other stuff. Because it seemed to him that we presume too much about what our reason can achieve. We presume that we can prove the existence of God, that we can talk about all these metaphysical issues, which he thinks we can't. Or rather we can, but carefully. So he called his philosophy critical philosophy, in opposition to dogmatic philosophy. His philosophy is critical. He wrote 3 critiques. The first one, most famous, like I said, Critique of Pure Reason. Its first edition was 1781. 1781. After it was published, it was misunderstood. A lot of people thought what he is saying is what Berkeley is saying, basically. He tried to distinguish himself from Berkeley very, very hard, but he couldn't. First edition of Critique was perceived just like that, just like Berkeley philosophy. So basically saying that everything is a product of our ideas, if not fed by God, but then produced by us ourselves, which it is not. Then he came up with a second edition, 1787, which is different from the first. He kind of rewrote the whole thing. He skipped certain chapters completely. He added completely different chapters. Now if you actually read Critique, everybody reads both of them. Why? Because they complete each other. You understand him better if you read both. First one is called version A, the second one version B. And they even have different page numbers and so on. So that is, why did he do that? He was trying to prove in the second edition he is not Berkeley. And that's not what Berkeley was saying at all. And the goal is to set out legitimate claims of reason. What can reason really know? Copernican revolution. That's what he himself called his philosophy. What did he mean by this? He says, there is no doubt whatsoever that our cognition begins with experience. But although all cognition commences with experience, yet it does not on that account all arise from experience. So let's do it in kind of slightly more visual way. Remember, the problem they were all dealing with, you have a mind and you have some object. whatever it is. We don't have direct access to this object. We can see it, for example, right? We can see, we get from the object some sort of visual impression, we get some sort of sensual impression, we touch it, and so on. But in our mind, we have just idea as a result of that. And how can we know there really is object? This is what they're dealing with. So one way to say, like Berkeley was saying, basically there's no object. It's just an idea. An idea gets straight into our head from God. So that is where we kind of starting with, and Kant himself was working with that. This is one way to look at it. Representative realism of Locke, remember, he was saying, no, there is object. It's real. It's just that we don't have access to it. We only have access to our ideas, to representations. So that's kind of one way to say it. One way to, Berkeley was saying there's no objects, it's just ideas. Locke was saying, no, there are objects, it's just we don't know for sure, but we can presume it. And both of them seem to be problematic. Then, as a result, Hume just says, well, we don't know. We don't know anything, and this is all we can at this point presume. Now, Copernican revolution of Kant, it's not, I don't know, but when he said Copernican revolution, that's maybe when people thought what he was saying is what Berkeley said, but it's not. He's saying, how about we presume that our mind also adds something to the object? So, instead of that focusing on the object, we switch the focus on the mind. That's the Copernican revolution, right? Like instead of the sun circling the earth circles the sun. Instead of object being there and mind trying to passively receive the idea of an object, we have to understand that the object is there. He's not saying like Berkeley there is no object, but mind adds something to the object. The best way to think about it is this. Suppose without glasses you can't see. Now, when you put the glasses on, you do see, but the glasses now distort the actual reality. So that's what the Kant's idea is in a nutshell. He's saying our mind adds something to the experience. There is actual matter of experience which comes from the objects, but in order for us to accept this matter, we have to add the form of experience to them. And the form of experience is something in our mind. Our mind adds it. So that's the idea in a nutshell. It helps to explain a lot what others were confused about, including the Hume's questions. The question of the freedom of the will, the question of the what is self, and so on. So that is what he was trying to do. And then he said, okay, when we assume that, what is then, can we, where can we get from here? What would it mean for us? And he works out through the critique trying to explain it. And there are several things which immediately come up. This is like another way to think about it, like a cookie press. The book explains it as cookie press. So what we get from the objects and the world is like a dough. But without pressing it into a certain form, our mind cannot understand it. So what our mind does to it, it presses it into this form. Right? And only then you get a cookie. There is some real stuff out there. And it does indeed, it's not the ideas from that. It's real. But we wouldn't be able to understand it or perceive it if our mind didn't do certain work in order to accept that stuff. Okay. One of the important things there, which makes it a little complicated, and this is like the details of how he was answering Hume's skepticism. Let's think about these statements. Are they true or false, and how do we know they are true or false? So first statement, all bachelors are unmarried. Is it true? No?
No.
Not all bachelors are unmarried?
They could lie.
Huh?
They could lie.
But wouldn't
Or
they
could be like in a
No, hold on.
polyamorous.
Hold on, but then would they be bachelors? Are you confusing bachelor with just young man?
What's your definition of bachelor?
Unmarried person. Well, we can look it up.
No, because I don't know the definition if I'm being honest.
Huh?
I didn't know the definition if I'm being honest.
Okay, well, I'm telling you. It's an unmarried person. That's what it means. So, is it true that all bachelors are unmarried? Okay, how do you know? Did you actually find all the bachelors and check whether they're married? No, from the definition, right? From the definition. You know definition, you immediately know that all bachelors are unmarried because that's the definition of a bachelor. Okay, great. How about all bachelors in this class are 6 feet tall? Is it true or false?
False.
Well, how do you know?
Because that's not a definition. That's a trait.
Huh?
That's a trait someone might have.
No, yeah, but I mean, how would you know whether all bachelors in this class are 6 feet tall?
Because you observe them.
Yeah, but you have to observe it, right? Did you actually do that? You guys seem so confident about it. Do we even have bachelors in this class?
Yes.
Yes? I mean, I actually see 2 guys. Are you both guys unmarried? Or at least one of you? You unmarried or married? Okay, so we have at least one. No, but seriously, how else would you know? I am actually married, right? So I'm not a bachelor. Is it impossible that they both were married? No, it's unlikely because you're kind of young. So, but why would you presume that? Imagine it, just 2 guys. It's not like we have 50 guys here. Just 2 other guys. They both could be married. Then we will have no bachelors whatsoever. In fact, there could be no guys here. I'm surprised there is only 2, but you never know. There could be a class with only girls, and then there are no bachelors. Because a girl cannot be a bachelor. She can be a bachelorette, but not a bachelor. Anyway, so the point here, though, is to know this, you actually have to go into the reality and check. That's how you can answer this question. Unlike with the first one. So that's one difference. They are true or false statements, but they're true or false for different reasons. First one is true or false because we know it from definition. We don't need to do anything to find out. Second one, we actually have to do something to find out. Okay, so the 2 kinds of cognition here, a priori cognition. That's how you know things without any experience, right? Remember, a priori, prior to experience. The first one is a priori. All bachelors are unmarried. You don't need any experience to know that. Second one, a posteriori, posterior to experience. You can only know this after you experienced it, after you did the work, after you asked all the bachelors, all the men. After that, you may even need to measure them because I don't know, are they 6 feet tall or not? But that's another question, right? Maybe they are. 6 is a lot, but what if it's say 5 and 5 inches, right? So that could be like, we may even need to measure because it could be like close, who knows? So that's the 2 types of cognition. And then he also says there are 2 varieties of judgments themselves, which are analytic judgments and synthetic judgments. Now, what exactly is the difference here? Analytic judgments are a type of judgments where we actually basing it on a principle of contradiction. So all bachelors unmarried is analytic because the principle of contradiction tells us that bachelor cannot be married because that means somebody who's unmarried. But synthetic judgments are not like that. In synthetic judgment, you actually need to compare something. It's what he calls, Analytic ones he calls judgments of clarification, since it does not add anything to the concept of a subject, only breaks down the concept into smaller components. Synthetic, on the other hand, does add something. It gives us additional knowledge, right? So if we do something like this, judgments of the sorts synthesize or bring together the subject, which is bachelors in this class, and predicate 6 feet tall. Not all bachelors are 6 feet tall. So we take the two and we kind of measure them against each other. It's not a logical contradiction to deny this statement. So, as a summary, we can have 4 possible combinations, but actually really only 3, because the 4th one doesn't make any sense. We can have analytic a priori statements. Analytic a priori statements is something like all bodies are extended. They don't give us any new knowledge, because it's like duh. But we also don't need to do any calculations or anything here. It's already clear, so it is analytic a priori. Analytic a posteriori doesn't exist, because if you need to do some experiments, if it's a posteriori, it can't be analytic. Analytic just means that it's already within the concept. But you can have synthetic a posteriori. That is the type of judgment which is based on 2 different concepts, the bachelor and 6 feet tall, and then you kind of combine them. Practically all of the things which we need to do some work with experience are like that. But he says there is also another type, and that's what he calls synthetic a priori judgment. And this is important to understand. What is synthetic a priori judgment? It is something which is not as obvious as bachelor is unmarried, but also you don't need experience here. And good example is mathematics. Right? Mathematics, do you need to do any experiments in mathematics?
Not necessarily.
Or in fact, not at all. You can apply mathematics to physics or other sciences where you do experiments, but if you major in mathematics, are you going to be doing labs? Not really, right? You're going to be doing only calculations. However, the difference with something as primitive as all bachelors are unmarried is that you cannot immediately know it. You can gain new knowledge once you do the work in your head. And you can get to it in this way. And this is the type of judgments, he says, which includes all events have a cause. And the reason we have this is very simple, because that is the form within our mind. That is how mind is set up for us. So for us, it is indeed true that all events have a cause, because that's the only way we can perceive things. And it is necessary for us. We cannot know the reality unless we presume that every event has a cause. Unless, that's like, you can think about it this way. That's how our mental software works. Our mental software is set up in such a way that for us every event has a cause. And this is why this is the type of synthetic a priori judgment. Now, given that these judgments are synthetic, they do add something to our knowledge. However, they are all done in our head, so they are a priori based on necessity judgments, and all mathematics is like that. Now, Kant asks this question. How are these unique sorts of judgments possible in general? How are they possible? How can we have something like this? How are synthetic a priori judgments possible in mathematics in particular? How are they possible in physics? And how are they possible in metaphysics and morality? And his answer is, like I already said, it's because it is the form of our mind. That is already ingrained in us. But is it the reality? Well, that's the big question, right? Because we can't go outside our mind and find out. But he uses what he calls a transcendental method. Transcendental method proceeds from the nature of experience to the necessary conditions of its possibility. So going backwards from experience. We have experience. He asks, what is necessary for us in order to have this experience? Well, like even just, let's try to do what Kant did and think about it. What is necessary for us to have experience?
The ability to analyze?
No, but experience, wait. Dogs and cats have experience. They don't analyze it. So what is necessary then? Well, for one thing, it has to be in space. And for the other thing, it has to be in time. That is the necessary conditions. So that's some of these forms. Space and time are forms of our experience which are necessary for us in order to have experience in the first place. Right? We can't perceive any objects outside of us without space. We can't. Space is what he calls form of outer sense. But we also cannot perceive ourselves outside of time. Because in our mind, things consecutively follow each other. Our thoughts follow each other. So that would be form of inner sense. Now let's do this thought experiment. One by one, imaginatively subtract all objects from the world until nothing is left but empty space. Can you do it? So like slowly removing first like all the tables from this room, all the people from this room. Can you imagine this room empty? Then room itself, the whole building, the earth, everything. And then just vast empty space. Can you do it? Can you? Okay, now try to do the other way around. Try to imagine objects without any space. Can you do that?
Like mashed together?
No, like no dimension whatsoever. You're not in space. No, you can't. That's why you look confused. You cannot do that because, like I said, that is a necessary form of us experiencing objects. So we cannot imagine them without space because that doesn't make any sense for us. So this is what he's saying. Space and time are real in empirical sense, but they are not real in transcendental sense. They are not properties of things in themselves. So this is where we get to his famous thing in itself. What is a thing in itself according to Kant? The object as it is in itself that would be the thing in itself. Not as it is perceived by us. Right? Because, remember, Kant says, there are indeed objects, they're real. But when we perceive them and use our forms of our mind, we distort it in a way. So how would this object be if we did not use our mind? Well, we can't know it, because everything we approach is with the mind. But he says, okay, but let's figure out what is it our mind adds to the object, and two of the things our mind adds are space and time. Because they are conditions we need in order to perceive them. So this is a distinction. This is what empirically real, right? Object, space, and time. And this is what is transcendentally real. So you can say this is like real. This is real for us. And this is real. All right, what else is there? Our mind also uses certain categories of understanding which we need in order to perceive any object whatsoever. And he actually bases it on Aristotle. He goes back to Aristotle, and there's quite a few things he finds there. So there's two things constantly interact with our mind. This is a good quote. To neither of these powers may a preference be given over the other. Without sensibility, no object would be given to us. Without understanding, no object would be thought. So sensibility and understanding are like two sides of the same coin. Thoughts without content are empty. You cannot think about nothing. Intuitions without concepts are blind. If you're thinking but you don't have any concepts, you are blind. So the understanding can intuit nothing. These senses can think nothing. Only through their union can knowledge arise. Thoughts and senses working together, kind of like in unison. So knowledge is more than just sense data. We're not passively receiving experience from the outside world. We're constantly working on it. Our mind works on it and produces certain results. And it's important to understand, because we sometimes take it for granted that we see objects and so on. But how do we know they are objects? What does our mind exactly do in order for us to perceive it as objects? This is what she was trying to figure out. The categories of understanding, he says, these four categories: quantity, quality, relation, and modality. Quantity would be unity, plurality, and totality. This is what our mind uses, right? This is within our mind. The categories of understanding are not properties of objects themselves. They are properties of our mind, and we use them. We perceive things as unity, right? What would it mean, unity? Well, why is this a table? A table is a unity, right? But is it a unity?
Of objects?
No, the table is one thing, right? You perceive it as one thing. Why is it one thing? Why do you not add the chair or the floor? Why is this different stuff? How do you know it's different? Why can't you perceive just part of the table rather than the whole table? Your mind creates this unity of a table or a bottle or something else. But what do you do when you do that? How do you distinguish it from other stuff? Because if you think about it, when you see the room, it's just like a blur of variety of colors and other things, right? That's what you, generally speaking, see. And then you start distinguishing again. There are human beings, there are tables, there are chairs, there's other stuff. So you kind of picking these certain chunks. So unity is one of those properties. Unity and plurality. There are many tables, each of them is one table. Many people, each of them is one person. And there's this totality. The room with all these people and tables and other stuff. Then quality, that's another one. Reality, negation, limitation. So whether something is real or not real, negation. Whether it's limited or unlimited, that's another thing our mind does. Substance is also here. Substance is necessarily for our mind to see certain things as substances. Causality is also here. We need this as part of the function of our mind. Community, reciprocity, possibility, impossibility, existence, non-existence, necessity, contingency. This is not properties of objects themselves. This is properties of our understanding. So this is how he answers Hume. Hume says we cannot have a priori knowledge because we have a flow of unconnected impressions in which anything is possible and nothing is logically necessary, right? There's just one thing happens after another. Kant says no, sensations appear together in consistent and permanent groups, and we experience these collections of sensations as objects within our objective world. because for us that is how world is. The big question here is it really how world is, or is it just for us? And Kant says it is just for us. Substance, among other things, is a logical category. You need it in order to interact with the world. The empirical concepts such as frog, star, apple is something our mind has to create, because that is how our mind perceives reality. Substance is a logical category, but not a metaphysical category. Without the mind, there are no apples. It doesn't make any sense. So in this case, you can see how there is some connection to bird. Same thing with causality. He says, no, it's not that just one thing follows the other, but it is necessary feature of our mind that there should be causal connections. So causality and substance are all here. All of this, including space-time, causality, substance, and even self, as we will see, the features of our mind, which is necessary for our mind in order to perceive the reality. But they are not real in a transcendental sense. They are real in empirical sense. They are real for us. That's how we see the world. Now, contrary to Hume, we do distinguish between statements every lemon has a sour taste and every event has a cause. Because Hume thought that we only know every event has a cause because one event always precedes the other, but Kant says, no. Whether we know whether every lemon has a sour taste, that's from experience. Like you taste one lemon, it is sour, taste another one, it is sour, and so on. Every event has a cause is not like that, because that's not the result of experience. It's a feature of our mind. For us, that's how things have to be. We cannot have things any other way. Everything has to have causal chain, and this chain goes on. We can't imagine a world where causal order doesn't exist. That's why we, even with the world itself, we ask this question, right? Who created the world? Because everything has a cause. The world should have a cause. But the important thing here is it for us, or is it really how things work? And Kant says, no, that's for us. For us, every event has a cause. Whether it is like this in real reality, we don't know. Okay. So substance and causality, just like space and time, conditions of experience. We need them in order to experience things. But they are not properties of things in themselves. Empirically real, but not transcendentally real. So the synthesizing activity of our mind. Let's just go through this, try to explain what is happening according to Kant, how all of these categories work. The activity, book gives example of music, and I think we can also use the example of sporting events. So let's say you hear music. Now one thing which happens is the synthesis of apprehension and intuition, as he calls it. When you hear music, do you not hear some other things? Let's say you're driving in a car and you hear music. Wouldn't there be also engine noise, some other noises? So you're separating the music from this other stuff, right? That's one of the things of what is happening. Let's say you are at the football game. Again, there are a lot of things you see, but you concentrate on the players, right? Your mind actually kind of carves it out, this specific group, other than some other stuff. And if somebody asks you, for example, have you seen I don't know, this dude on another side wearing red hat? You can say, what dude? I wasn't paying attention. That's not what I was looking for. But you are looking at a specific part of the picture, which is the players and what is happening in front of you. So that's synthesis of apprehension and intuition. It happens all the time. You don't concentrate on everything, you concentrate on certain things, and then you synthesize it in your imagination because you connect it to what was happening before that. Music doesn't happen instantaneously, right? It goes note after note after note after note, but in your mind, you kind of understand it as a melody. It's the whole thing. How do you do that? At every one moment, you just hear bum or bim. So you kind of remember what was before it, right? And you connect all of this. So that's another thing your mind is doing. Similarly, in a football game, if you just look at it 1 second and close your eyes immediately, that's just one picture. But to understand what's going on, you have to remember what happened before that. Where every player was, what they were doing. And that's the only way for you to understand it. You cannot do it at one snap. Okay, and then there is synthesis of recognition in a concept, right? So for example, music, you have a concept of music, you have a concept of specific music, like if it's Beethoven. And you kind of match it against what you're hearing, and then you go, oh, it's Beethoven. Similarly with football, how do you know it's football and not baseball? Well, you have a concept of football, right? And again, your mind kind of takes what you see and tries to fit it, and then you can say, yeah, it is football rather than baseball. Why? Well, because those pictures which I saw are of people running around with the ball rather than hitting it with the bats. So we don't think about that, but our mind constantly is doing all this stuff. It's like processing stuff. And that, of course, has its effect. That's what he means when the objects confirm to the mind. Objects found within experience result of mind synthesizing activity. Our mind constantly doing something like this, and that's how we perceive the world. You can perceive the world in many different ways, depending on how your mind operates. Two people can walk into the same room and see completely different things. And then they will walk out, and one of them will say, oh, did you see this green picture on the wall? Wasn't it weird? And the other one, picture? I didn't even look at the picture. But did you see this table? That was great. Right? Same room. But we just have different experiences. Why? That's what later philosophers will actually work with. But this is a starting point. This is a very important starting point for the future philosophy, because it's important to understand what Kant was doing, what he was saying here.